On today's episode of the Coaching Coordinator Podcast, we have Eric Marty, who joined us at the beginning of the season on the OC Office Hour, and Dan Carrel, who we talk to every week about defense. And today the focus is going to be on complementary football. So, Eric, it's great to have you back.
I appreciate you having me on, Keith, or back on, and Dan, always good to catch up with you.
Yeah, Dan, it's great to have you back here as well, and thank you for arranging this.
Yeah, I think it's a great topic. It's something I'm excited to talk about. I'd like to know more about how Eric thinks I screw us up. So.
Well, I think it's an interesting topic. It's almost become a buzzword, complementary football. You even hear it on TV broadcasts now. And the idea today is to really dig into that. And what does that mean? What does it mean to play team football? What does it mean to be able to complement the other side of the ball? Obviously, special teams plays a role in this, but specifically, we're going to talk today about the offense and the defense. So I'll start both of you out with this question. And Dan, we'll start with you. Just a simple question. What is team football to you?
I think that the buzz around that word, as you say, complementary football or team football, is usually defensive coaches being upset or frustrated that their offense tempos and they have to play 100 plays. I think team football in some circles has come to mean like just control the ball. And I don't know that I believe that. I don't know if that's true. I think that team football to me is a cohesive plan about how we're going to play offense, defense, and special teams and making sure those things fit. And I look at it personally, like if I was ever in the situation to be a head coach, I look at it as really allocation of risk. If you're going to run an offense, like if you're going to run Tennessee's offense where you're fast and the ball's in the air a lot, and you're just as likely to score a 60-yard touchdown on the second play of the drive as you are to go 3 and out and put the defense right back out there. That's a risky offense in a lot of ways. I don't think that, in my opinion, you would play such a risky defense. Now you don't really want to play a defense that's built around blitzes and man pressures and the type of things that put the defense vulnerable. And the same thing with special teams. Like you build that all in. So to me, team football is how you allocate the risks that you're comfortable with and how much you go for it on fourth down and how that plays off of the kind of defense you have. So, I think in general, that's kind of how I see team football. Not necessarily just controlling the ball or doing it one way, but making sure all 3 phases fit.
Eric, from your perspective, how do you view that idea of team football or complementary football?
Coming from a coordinator perspective, I think it's your responsibility to the team and the game plan. And basically, you got coming from the top down, there's got to be a clear understanding of what each phase of the game needs to do to win the football game. And so if we need to be really conservative on offense because we know that we're really good defensively and special teams wise, and we just can't screw it up. And if we don't screw it up, we got a chance to win a football game. That may be playing team football one week, or it may be we're going to struggle to stop these guys. We better throw it early and often and try and score a lot of points. That may be team football one week. So I see it as kind of your responsibility to the overall game plan and how you're going to fit what you do to complement what the defense is capable, what the special teams are capable of in order to give your team the best chance to win a football game.
Now, Eric, you have been able to sit in the head coach seat and have that perspective, the head coach at Reedley College and East Los Angeles College. Do you think, having done that before, did that change your perspective on that idea of team football when you sat in that seat for the first time?
Yeah, I think so. And, in some ways, as it relates to being an offensive coordinator and a head coach, it makes your vision and play calling a little bit easier versus when you're reporting to a head coach as an offensive coordinator. You really want that clear communication as far as how aggressive you want me to be week in, week out, or vice versa, how conservative. But, I think you really see the pieces fit together when you're sitting in the head coach's chair, as well as you need the buy-in from your coordinator, so you don't feel like you're fighting them to try and get alignment there. And then the last thing is, as much as it's about playing complementary offense and defensive football, I think it's getting a ton of buy-in from both your coordinators as far as how important and how much emphasis they want to put on guys on their side of the ball performing at a high level in special teams to make a difference in the third phase of the game.
Now, in both of your current situations, being coordinators for the Michigan Panthers. You guys obviously sit in that same staff room before things break up and things are going to happen. There's going to be discussions, but how, in your situation, is this idea of team football handled with Coach Fisher?
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously we have a lot of the discussions on what our roster is capable of. And, you know, I even think back to early as we're kind of all figuring out year one of the USFL, what we got. And it even goes back so much as how we're building the roster and personnel moves. And, you know, I remember a conversation early in the year where, you know, I felt like offensively we only had a limited amount of moves. So basically kind of the conversation was, hey, what can we do move-wise to maximize what we have offense and defensively from a personnel standpoint? Where can we improve, and how can that ultimately impact the caliber of our team and what we can do on each side of the ball as far as playing that complementary football? So, you know, at the pro level with your ability to make in-season moves, preseason moves, et cetera, compared to, you know, what we've all experienced in college and in high school, there's a lot more flexibility, even from a personnel standpoint, all the way down to, you know, the micro of what we're doing on game day, X's and O's wise.
Dan, your thoughts?
It's so unique. I mean, we started the season in the first several games dressing and activating 38 players. So in the beginning of the week, when you have the discussion on who's going to be active or who's likely to be active, barring injury and whatnot, it really does put the offense in a situation where, like, okay, these are the personnel groups we're going to have to use because we have this guy down or that guy down, and now we're going to be a 12 personnel team this week or whatever. And I think defensively, if you were playing somebody who was going to play with big people and you were going to carry an extra linebacker, you know, you think carrying one extra linebacker doesn't sound like a lot, but when you're only dressing 17 players to play defensive football, it changes a lot of dynamics, right? So it's going to be, we're going to have to play different coverages and be a little more simpler because we might have to play with an extra linebacker against, you know, 10 or 11 personnel that we typically wouldn't do. So, you know, it's probably not as applicable to other leagues and other situations because it's so personnel driven because the roster is so small on game day. So I think those are the things we had to work through as a staff. And then obviously special teams fits into that as well, a big part of it. And, you know, those were the main conversations, honestly, especially early in the week.
So looking at situations that are applicable really to everybody, that situational football, what situations do offenses and defenses need to work together on the most? And Dan, we'll start you off with this one.
I think that there's so much stuff we do as coaches that we continually evaluate and continue to try to get better at. But I don't know that we spend enough time talking to each other in situations and in certain areas of the game and really communicating on game day. I would say when you get into the fourth quarter of a game, whatever the situation is, now if it's completely one-sided one way or the other, then it is what it is, and everybody's just, you know, trying to finish it out. But when you have a one-score game, two-score game, and you got 7-8 minutes left, I feel like we could improve so much, everybody, every staff I've ever been on, just communicating what we need to do to win at that point. Because I look at a game like when you're in the beginning of a game, there's an infinite amount of possibilities that are going to happen before you get to the end of the game. But the closer you get to the end, there's a lot less scenarios. There's a lot less scenarios that are going to come up with 5 minutes left and we're down 10 and we're punting, or 5 minutes left and we're up 7 and we're punting. Right. So there's only a couple avenues that are going to happen to get the game to the end. And just to be able to communicate, I think, with the offense and defense, like, I mean, say we're up 7, we're going to punt the ball. And, you know, if I could communicate with Eric and he said, look, we're running the ball really well, just get the ball back without a touchdown and we're going to win the game. Let him get a field goal. That's fine. Take a risk here and there if you need to. Just keep him out of the end zone and we're going to win the game. Or the inverse, like we're up 7 and we're punting. It's like, hey, we cannot run the ball right now. We're down a running back. We're down a guard. Like, we're not going to run the clock out. You're probably going to have 2 more possessions. You know, if you want to try to be more aggressive and try to keep them out of field goal range, so we still got the, you know, 1-score lead. You know, I think those type of conversations that happen when you get down to where there's clearly only like 2 or 3 ways that this game's going to go at that point, right? I think that communication is paramount, and if you can get that done and you know, everybody puts their egos aside and communicate to try to win a game, I think is really good.
Eric, your thoughts?
Anytime you have those open lines of communication from coordinators, from head coaches saying, hey, this is where I think we're at in this game. We can stop these guys. We can't stop these guys. We can score 100 on these guys, whatever it may be. I think that helps so much. I mean, I can think back to times during the season when Coach Fisher was on the headset telling me to be patient and run the football. I can also think back to times where he was saying, hey, we got to open it up and be a little more aggressive. And getting that type of feedback from your head coach really helps you as a play caller. But one thing I'd also like to point out as far as kind of this overall concept of complementary football, one of the things that was great about working with Dan, even in our first year together, was we would take that idea back to camp. And, you can say, yeah, the USFL is unique because we have small rosters, but then you also have a 1A, 2A football coach that's doing the same thing. And so, as we're going through walkthroughs in the hotel or early season walkthroughs in camp, I thought we did a pretty good job of saying, hey, this is what we need to see, and this is what you guys do. Let's get together and rep it in a walkthrough, or let's go ahead and hit it in a team situation, or even early in the week saying, all right, we're going to see a lot of even front quarters. I know that's obviously in your base package. Let's go ahead and get a good versus good period where you call your stuff, but it's also a lot of the base looks or tailor the base looks to what we're going to see on Saturday and really help each other out there. So, I think being able to work together as an offense and defense and use some of your base stuff to prepare for Saturday, or even when you're in camp, to check some of those boxes that you feel like you need to check, really, really helps you get the best possible look versus just separating offense and defense and trying to do a scout look and those things. Anytime you can coordinate and work together like that, ultimately it's also really going to help your team down the road.
I appreciate that. And that was going to be one of the questions on the preparation and practice. So Dan, from your perspective, looking at that, again, what each of you do in practice and preparation to help each other be ready on game day and situationally ready.
Yeah, you can go back. I think you can expand this topic out to a million different things. I think that's maybe what Eric's saying is maybe one of the more important ones, in the sense that as a defensive coach, I want our offense to be multiple for my sake, at least, right? And maybe they're not as multiple on game day, or they don't use everything every game, or they do what they have to do to win the game. But from a practice standpoint, I've been in the situation where somebody's 10 and 11 with very minimal 12, and they never get bigger than that. And you get into game weeks where somebody might be all 12, and you went through this, month-long training camp of practicing against 11, and maybe they don't motion, or maybe they motion every play or whatever. And then you just don't see enough things in camp. And now you're getting into game week and you're coaching stuff for the first time, and you don't want to do that, right? So I think that, Eric's offense, and as multiple as it is, and it puts you in some situations that we had to prepare for. And there were certainly at times some motions and some different things that came up that I might not have covered as detailed or as in depth as we had to, because we saw it during training camp. So I think that when you work with each other like that and it plays off each other, I think, and I hope that from a coverage standpoint, we were multiple enough to help them. And, I think those things are important. And, as a head coach, when you're deciding what schemes you want, I think that's something to look into. And I think that's something to be aware of, because, again, if your offense isn't very multiple defensively, you're going to have to practice that stuff at some point. And unfortunately, sometimes it starts game week one, and you're putting a sandbacker out there, and you're teaching them techniques, and you're teaching them plays. And man, we got to go into the first or second game, and we never really rep this stuff. But just then from the situational point, I think there's a lot of ways to rep situations with each other. And you just have to understand that you can do them a lot of different ways, and you can do offensive emphasis and defensive emphasis and things like that. But you got to be able to coach and learn through both sides of that, where the offense might be running a 2-minute drill where we play a certain coverage the whole time, but that doesn't mean we're a scout team, right? We're still learning, we're still coaching, we're still working techniques, and we're still learning the characteristics of that situation. So, as long as you work with each other and don't downplay taking a backseat in one drill where they might be on, and then you're kind of maybe a little bit of their scout team, or just working the drill so they can get their stuff down, and then then vice versa.
Yeah, and I do want to get back to those situations here in a second, but I think you brought up a great point, and you mentioned it a couple times now, just looking at the overall design of things, right? And Eric, again, from you having been a head coach, thinking about those situations when you're putting together a coaching staff and you're looking at what do we want to run on offense, what do we want to run on defense, how much of this really can be set up in a way that it is going to be complementary in the way that you start to put it together. And this doesn't even have to be a new staff. I mean, it could be looking at things from year to year and knowing the needs of the team. But just in that perspective of going all the way back to the beginning, right? Season's over. You're looking at everything from the past season, or you're into a new situation, whatever it might be. How do you build things and set them up to be able to play complementary ball?
A couple things I can think of off the top are first off, I went through a phase at Reedley where I think I had 3 coordinators in about a month and a half, and so on the defensive side of the ball, and so I ended up taking over the defensive side of the ball just from a terminology standpoint and saying, hey, this is what we're going to be. So in the future, when we had those next 2 coordinators come in, they were running their own stuff and teaching the nuances, but it was consistent terminology for our guys of what we're calling our fronts and our coverages and whatnot. And so from a head coaching standpoint, I think you need to have a system in place on both sides of the ball that allows some continuity, especially with the way staffs turn over. From a terminology standpoint, there's also a broad enough system that allows you to tailor it exactly where you want to go. We want to be more of a blitzing attacking defense, or we want to be an on front, or even, it's a system of terminology that encompasses that, and the same thing on offense. Maybe we're just calling more of our 12 personnel stuff this year versus some of our 10 personnel stuff. And so in the design of your program, making sure that you have some of those fail safes in to allow continuity and allow you to tailor it where you need to go. Now, the second part of that would be early in my Reedley tenure, we weren't great on offense. And so, we needed to be good defensively, and we needed to be consistent, and we needed to be sound, and we needed to try and hold people to low numbers in order to win a football game, versus near the end of it, it was like, hey, let's just go get after people. And if we do give up a long touchdown, we're going to be able to score plenty more times. So let's go attack. Let's try and create turnovers. Let's try and create havoc. Yeah, we want to be sound and all that stuff, but we were willing to blitz and take some risks that we wouldn't have a couple of years before, because we knew that we could score and beat people in some boat races. And so, again, that can kind of be determined in those preseason meetings or week-to-week game plan meetings, where you say, hey, let's be really aggressive defensively because we feel good about what we're going to be able to do offensively in this game. So seeing a big picture preseason and communicating it to the staff, and then being able to go back and make those adjustments week to week, I think are really important.
Getting back into the situational side of things, and Eric, you and I talked about this on our podcast, repping that 2-minute drill, and Dan, we've talked about it as well. And you mentioned bringing out the book and here's what they do, and putting together the library on certain coordinators. But when you guys look at that from that standpoint of working with each other week to week on situations like that, the 2-minute, the 4-minute, the end of game situations, how can you best set those up again so that everybody's getting what they need out of those drills?
Yeah, I would say I'm a fan of a mock scripted 2-minute, during the season, and just put the defense in the calls that the other team's defense is going to be in the best you can. Script where the ball is going to be spotted. Like I would call it like buzz tempo, where we're not going to tackle. We're not going to even really tag off, just kind of buzz by and get it stopped. And I'm a fan of the mechanics of that on both sides. Then we flip it and play defensive emphasis, where we get the routes and the sequence that the offense is going to run. And I think you can do that as a conditioning drill. We tried that a little bit when I was at Houston as a conditioning drill to end of practice. We would play out these scenarios, but they would be scripted. If you threw a 5-yard out and the ball was dropped, you coached up the drop, but you moved the ball up 5. It was a scripted out set. And I like that, and using the scripts of the 2-minute drives that maybe the coordinator's been in. If the team itself has been in that, great. But then if the coordinator's been in it, I'm a fan of that in the season, to rep 2-minute and for everybody to get what they want, and to, use it as something at the end of practice that can be up tempo and can kind of be fun at times too.
Eric, I know we talked about it at length, but again, we'd love to hear your thoughts on it with Dan.
Yeah, I think you can make a conscious decision as a staff and look at early in the week and say, hey, what we do defensively is similar enough to what our offense is going to see from the opponent, and vice versa. 2-minute drill, you're going to see a bunch of 10 personnel, 2x2, 3x1. and we feel like what we're doing on offense is similar to what Dan's going to see. Great, let's go good versus good. Or other times it's really important, whether it's 2-minute or whether it's red zone, goal line, third down, you have to go emphasis. And I think it's really important to make those decisions as a staff early in the week so you know what you're preparing for, because there's so much value to good versus good. And we did a lot of good versus good situational stuff late in the week, as well as a lot of scout stuff. But, there are times that I did feel a little bit bad for Dan, the defense, watching us motion, 100 different times in a third down period late in the week, when I know they're going to play a team that was really very static. And, they've put in all these checks and worked this game plan now, and without the mindset of having to adjust it to a bunch of motions and shifts. And here we come in a good versus good period. So, there's obviously pros and cons to how you work everything. But again, I think the more staff communication, and that goes back to previous conversation we were having before we got on air about how you're building staff and whether it got or not guys know each other, and the chemistry and camaraderie to be able to have open lines of communication is really important. And thankfully, with Coach Fisher, we've done a pretty good job of that with our staff.
I do know this. It's better to have it the way Eric's saying than the other way, as far as we were handling shifts and motions that we weren't really preparing for. But it's better to have to handle them than to not handle them in practice and then they show up in the game. And I think that the player of the year in our league became that because he was a return specialist and he ran jet sweeps for endless amounts of yards. And we were probably the best team at defending the jet sweeps from him. And a lot of it is credited to the fact that we had to play against so many motions in practice, and we had to build really good rules in every coverage and every structure. So I think that's a real example of team football and of how, your offense motions a lot and they do it effectively, and it forces you to build rules in some coverages and in some situations and rethink some things. Really, it made our defense better.
In looking at that, right, and going back to that design, how important is for both sides really to have that multiplicity, to have that flexibility? Eric, you mentioned terminology, right? And I think a lot of this is just structure, because maybe you choose not to use some of those things, but when it always has to go to looking at a card versus just calling what you guys do because you have it within your system to do those kinds of things, again, how important is that to set up initially that, hey, we have terminology, both sides of the ball, that, again, we might not do it, but we have the ability to, and because we have the ability to, our guys have more of an understanding of it.
I think it's one of the most invaluable practice tools out there, and the ability to call things. And I think it comes back to having a system of language that makes sense within your offense and defense that isn't just a bunch of rote terminology that kids have to memorize. But I think, and I would go this way probably to a fault, but I would 100 times out of 100 rather have my guys or our defense scout unit getting their even front quarters, their odd cover 3 call or whatever NCAA field pressure. I would much rather see that come in live, quasi full speed in a scout period versus make everybody huddle up, look at a card to show them over front quarters, which they can run in their sleep. And I think you're going to get a better look for the offense. And I also think from a program overview now, whether they're starters or backups, your guys are getting quality reps. If we do see something that's so unique from, hey, they play this really unique alignment or structure to their quarters or cover 2 or what, yeah, sure, card it up and show your guys some video clips and figure out a way to get that taught. But unless it's something so unique that there's value in stopping it and carding it, and I would much rather just roll with the terminology and have the defense call it as close as they possibly can.
I don't know that I've ever been in a situation with that, though. We've tried over time to adapt to the other team's terminology and call things in a certain way. And even if we were carding things, to write on the card their calls. How much time, I know you guys are coming together quick in the USFL, but in, let's say, a typical season now going into year 2, how much time will you guys spend beforehand, before the season, going over those things so that practices can have a better structure and be more efficient?
I think this offseason that we know probably a little bit better what we're dealing with. I think we'll probably have a lot more of those conversations. I mean, honestly, last year, Eric and I talked a little bit on a Zoom. And then, when we got down there we had met with each other for quite some time one day. But I think that we have a better feel for the expectation. I think from my perspective, you know what you need to get done, and you know what it takes to put a product on the field that's good football. Like that, every coach pretty much has an idea what that is and what they need for their system. But you don't truly know what you're getting into until you're kind of in the middle of it. And you're like, okay, this is, when we made adjustments as we went, don't get me wrong. It wasn't like we just threw our hands up, but like we were making adjustments as we went for sure. And we made it better as we went. But, now I think coming into it, year two, I think it'll be the communication and practice will probably be substantially improved.
Yeah, it's not like to clarify. I mean, our scout periods, a lot of it was Dan holding the cards that we had carded up for them, and just making the calls to his defense. And on offense, it was me with the book. If I could just call the play in our terminology, we just go call the play and go run it. If we had to come together and look at it because it was something unique, we get that done. So I don't think there's that much preparation to make that happen. Now, obviously, some teams, the terminology and the breadth of their playbook may not allow that as much. So you got to come together and card more. And at the end of the day, however, you got to get it done. But I'm with Dan. I mean, and I think everybody that's returning this league, the first time you go into a situation, you don't necessarily know what you have or the structure of things. And now we have a better understanding of the caliber of football, the practice flow, what our guys are capable, et cetera, et cetera. So, I think there's going to be a lot more conversations on best practices to get our team playing at the highest level possible week in, week out, and prepare and also continue to develop our guys throughout the season.
And Keith, to go off that too, I think as the coordinators, like as Eric and as me, reading those cards and making those adjustments, like the ability to communicate with each other was so important, because I knew that when I handed Eric the cards, like he had this play in, but he didn't run it out of a tight stack. Okay. So he's going to make his call and get everybody lined up and then go adjust the splits. Right. So, there's a few things that defensively, like I know he's got the call, but he doesn't run it out of these splits, but we need these splits, right? Because we're going to make adjustments off these certain splits. And he doesn't run it, or maybe they block it a little bit different, or maybe, because the backside backer's out of the box, that, we'll open palm, sift this guy, and we'll wait for the backer to come in. But this other team, they didn't. They just veered up to air or whatever. Like, I'm going to take advantage of that in the game. So I think that those are the minute things that even though they have the play, there's still going to be a reason to either talk it about, or, have a card where, not that it has to be shown, right? It doesn't have to be shown. The coordinator can look at it and be like, okay, this is exactly what we do, except this doesn't look like what we would do here. So I'll make that adjustment real quick and we'll run the play. So I think that communication and just that, just ability to work with each other is important.
In that regard, looking at the idea of working with each other, and I'll share a scenario that really worked well for us, and we grew into this. We didn't start with it right away when I was at BW, but really started to have a strong relationship between the 4 full-time guys there. So the offensive coordinator, myself, the defensive coordinator, the DB coach, and then my offensive line coach. After we took a look at things, we did all our work for the week, maybe like on a Wednesday, sometimes on a Tuesday, we would get together and just talk about that particular team and what we saw. And when you think about it, we're always watching what opponents do. And certain opponents maybe did against them, or what we've seen them do against other opponents. And I think there's a lot of things you look at from your own perspective. And we would get some great information or great ideas from those guys just on here's what they're trying to do in this situation. We see it one way, but when you get the eyes of the other side on and that perspective, I think there's a lot there. Is that something you guys have done or look to do in the future?
I've never done it. I think it's valuable. I think that there are a lot of exercises that you can do together as an offensive staff and defensive staff that could provide a lot of value. I have not been a part of doing that. Honestly, some staffs I've been on, and it's unfortunate, but there's a lot of egos that sometimes you have to navigate. And I feel very fortunate in this staff that it's not really like that at all. And that, Eric and I could walk into Eric's office and say, hey, I've seen these guys office in the corner of the hotel that we have carved out for that particular time and say, hey, I've seen these guys on crossover film. These 2 plays that you guys have would really be good. And he would write them down and say thanks, and he would check it out, right? Where, maybe another staffs I've been on, I wouldn't feel as comfortable doing that with the offensive coordinator. So, and that's an unfortunate part of the whole deal, but you really have to have a great staff culture, I think, to share ideas across in a really constructive manner and to really play off each other and work with each other. So it would be something I'd be interested in doing. And I mean, maybe we'll see if that, we get the operation down smooth here for a year or two. Maybe that is something we will do, collaborate a little more.
And I think when I was a head coach coordinator, obviously you're a lot more engaged watching the overall game film, watching all three phases. The other thing, especially for Dan and I, and I mean, all the small school and high school coaches can relate out there. I mean, we were, especially year one, it was a pretty skeleton crew getting everything done. And so I think as you continue to streamline that operation and know what you have to do, building some things late in the week that are kind of simulation things or dialogues that you can have amongst the staff to foster communication on how everybody's feeling about the opponent and game plan, I think is really beneficial. So sounds like you had a pretty solid operation there at B-Dub and something that I think something that we can potentially look to add to our weekly routine, whether it's formal or informal.
Guys, to finish things up, I'd really like to hear from each of you and what the other side can do to play more complementary football. So, Eric, we'll start with you. When you're looking at it, what things do you feel a defense can do to be more complementary in the way that they're playing together with their offense?
The first thing I think dovetails back to what Dan was talking about when he talked about selecting what you're going to do offensively, defensively, et cetera, is just you hope that you are partnered with a defense and a defense coordinator that has a robust enough package that you're seeing. It doesn't have to be a ton, but just a handful of different coverages and really an odd and an even front and mixing in some bear there during your off-season work, et cetera, et cetera. As it relates to in-game, for me personally, if we're good on offense, I want a defense that's more attacking and not going to play base football and give up 8-10 play drives if they can't get somebody off the field, but be willing to be more aggressive with the confidence of knowing that, hey, we got an offense that even if we give up 21, 28, we're still going to be able to go out and score somebody, versus if we're not very good on offense, I prefer a team that's going to be a little bit more conservative on defense because, we know the value of points and it's going to be really hard for us to score. So we got to be a little bit more conservative and try and keep it to a lower scoring ball game. So those are some of the things that I look for in the complementary football conversation.
Dan, how about from your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I do think pace of play is important and it matters, but just from the perspective that I want to know and understand what the pace of play is and what the plan is. And if it's, look, we're going to play as fast as we can for 60 minutes, okay, then from a defensive perspective, we have to really change our understanding of how we build a roster. Like, we're truly developing 22 players at that point. If you have a chance to play 100 plays in a game, then you need 22 players. You need a two deep at every position that can actually go in the game. There doesn't need to be anybody in the two deep where you're saying he's going in and somebody on the sideline is going, oh no. Right? It can't be that, right? You have to know that going into off season, like, these guys are going to play super fast and we've got to have 22 players ready to play. I think that's important. I think just understand that plan. And then if we're going to be selective when we use tempo and when we use pace, that's great. What are our ideas on that? And then we had talked when I was at the University of Houston and going into the end of the 2018 year, Kendall Browse, our offense coordinator, and obviously everybody knows they play pretty fast, right? That's something they do. And we had some preliminary discussions about, with the head coach, can we set times in the game that are okay? Like, first quarter, foot's on the gas, do whatever you got to do. Kind of the middle eight of the game. We've talked about the middle eight before, just the last four of the first half, first four of the second half. Like, can we keep it slow in that way? So it kind of gives the guys an extended halftime, right? And then maybe depending on how the game's going, can we keep it slow in the third quarter? And then the fourth quarter, you got to do whatever you got to do to win the game, right? So just like, and that wasn't a refined plan yet. It would have been eventually, but just having that refined plan on when we're going to use tempo and how we're going to use it. And not, and that doesn't mean, and I don't really care what the answer is, whatever the offense needs, but I need to know so we can prepare for that. I think that's important. And I just think that the game day communication, and I've always headsets, I'm on the field and Eric's in the box, and headsets don't I can't talk to Eric during the game, which is unfortunate, but I wish headsets had that option where everybody could collaborate for just a minute or two and, during a TV timeout or something. But, communication on and openly, like what we're going to be able to do, what we got to do to win the game as the game nears to that point where, okay, somebody's going to win this game with 2 more scores, or the next point's going to win this game, or when it becomes clear how the game's probably going to end, or what the scenarios are, that we're able to communicate that stuff and just kind of, and obviously that's all subject to execution, but if we can communicate that stuff and everybody throws their ego out of it and just as matter of fact and bluntly as we can, then, we have a chance to help each other and win the game.
Well, guys, I really love that perspective today, and being able to get both sides of it, hear the back and forth between you guys, how things work well for you together, ideas that you shared here with each other, and I'm certain that this will be helpful to coaches out there. Eric, thank you again for your time and joining us again.
My pleasure, guys. Thanks for hanging out with me this morning.
And Dan, as always, thanks for taking the time every week and for the detail that you put into preparing for these shows.
Appreciate it, Keith. Love to do it.
If you want to learn Eric Marty's system, you can go to coachtube.com/Eric_Marty, and his entire offensive system is there. I'll put the link to that in the show notes. Follow all we're doing at coachandcoordinator.com and follow me on Twitter at Coach K. Grabowski.